Morning. Welcome to probably what is going to be one of the last education series on what, when, how, and where, and why to dehydrate. It's a little noisy outside. We have all the windows open, but hopefully you'll still be able to hear me. I'll speak loud. Anyhow, I just want to talk to you a little bit about dehydrating and why you would want to do that and what dehydrating is. Dehydration uses temperature, usually between 90 and 125 degrees, and an even airflow to slowly remove the moisture from food through evaporation. The purpose of dehydrating is to prevent food from spoiling and to extend its shelf life. Food is considered safe and dehydrated when you remove 95% of its moisture. Unless you've got really high-tech equipment, basically you're just going to have to learn by experience when it's done enough. Usually it's considered done and dehydrated when it's not sticky or tacky, when there's it doesn't feel moist or soft, so not like the commercial kind of dehydrated things that are soft because they've got preservatives in them. And often it will snap or crunch easily when you try to break it. So many foods just require different dehydrating techniques, and that can include blanching or boiling, steaming, spraying with lemon juice, and a couple of other methodologies. Potatoes, for example, have to be parboiled, or they can be roasted, but I've just found it easier to parboil them and it doesn't heat my kitchen up. Because if you don't parboil them, which means cook them a little bit through, what's going to happen is they're going to turn black after you dehydrate them, and then because of the starches that are in them. And then when they turn black, no matter, even if you rehydrate them, they're going to stay black, and then they become inedible. So you've just wasted your time. So the type of preparation that you do for dehydrating, it seems like it's a waste of time, but in the long run, will really make your food last and preserve, which is the whole point. So when choosing a dehydrator, I know I've already kind of given my pitch for Excalibur. Excalibur's not the only one that makes a square dehydrator. Cabela makes one. There's quite a few others out there. And so it's not necessarily the brand, it's the features in a dehydrator that you want to be paying attention to that your dehydrator has. So the first one would be the fan in the back, like this is. And the reason you want a fan in the back is because it's going to pull the air, circulate the air from front to back, as opposed to a round dehydrator that's going to only do it from bottom to top. And when that happens, you've got to, and we'll talk in a second, you have to rotate the trays in order to keep the airflow and the dehydrating constant, as opposed to a square dehydrator where the fan is in the back and then it stays that way for you. I rotate my shelves just because about halfway through, just because I want to, but not because I have to. The next thing that you are going to think about is size in a dehydrator. Size is measured by tray, by number of trays. So this is a 4-tray dehydrator. They make 9 ones. I think Cabela's makes like a 12-tray dehydrator. Unless you're growing, on a farm somewhere, honestly, 4 trays for the average dehydrator is probably going to be good. There have been times, I confess, where I wished I had a 9-tray dehydrator, but those times are really rare, and they were also back when I wasn't working 12 hours a day and things like that. So the average person is probably only going to need a 4-tray dehydrator, but you can do whatever you want because it's your food storage. Ideally, in your trays, you're going to want ones that are flexible. I do have, and I meant to go get it, and I just didn't. We have a round dehydrator from back in the early days of my dehydrating, and you can't do this with a round dehydrator. We just finished. So when I talk about flexible trays, just like I did in the very first video that I had, we're talking about something like this, where the sheet is removable, and it flexes. Round dehydrators don't do this. The tray itself is fixed to the frame, and if you ever dehydrate, onions, and have to try and scrub those things off of there, it's going to be so fun for you. But one of the reasons that you want to have a flexible frame is for just like this. We just dehydrated these last night. These are some black beans. I kind of overcooked them in the pressure cooker, so they split out quite a bit more than my other set that I did, which was nice and looked like black beans. But you want to be able to have flexible trays because you couldn't do this with a round tray. Pick up the food and pour it directly into the can without having to, or jar, without having to worry about it. So I'm going to have basically black bean powder because I overcooked these in the food processor. But that's okay because there are worse things in the world than black refried beans. And that's what these will dehydrate up to, is that kind of consistency. And now I have a mess, but you know what? That's why we do these videos, so you can see that I'm not perfect and we just work it. Again, this is one of those Classico jars, a regular mouth lid, canning lid. I'm not gonna seal it up because I've got more to put in here. And then you've got a canning jar for free. We've had that conversation several times. Alrighty. The other thing that you're going to want to consider in your dehydrator is a temperature gauge. We've had that conversation before. The round dehydrators do not have one. A square tray, whether it's this one or a Cabello or some other brand, usually will have a temperature gauge, and you are going to want one because different foods require different temperatures. That's a whole nother story. It's a whole nother, conversation. But just trust me when I say that, unless you're making jerky, which would be kind of hard to do if you're doing vegan food storage, you are not going to want to dehydrate everything at jerky temperature, and that's what round dehydrators do. There are a lot of square dehydrators that have timers, bells and whistles, walk, talk, dance, prance, etc., etc. Those are really unnecessary. They're nice to have, but they're unnecessary. I wouldn't pay more money for them. If I had a dehydrator that was $100 without one and $100 with a timer, would I buy the timer one? Yeah, sure. But I wouldn't spend more money to just buy the timer because the reality is you can't go by a timer anyway. You really have to kind of go by touch and feel. So how to place food on a dehydrator. Items that are small, like beans, peas, corn, whatever, you can, vegetables, fruits, most fruits, you can just pile it on, smooth it out, put it on the tray. Things that are sliced, if you've watched my dehydrated bell pepper video, things that are sliced like that, my sweet potatoes that I sliced up, those need to be placed side by side, and they need to have space in between them. Not a lot of space, but they can't be touching or overlapping. And the reason for that is that they will fuse together. When you have small things, it's not that big of a deal because, you can kind of, crunch them up or a little bit or, break them apart. But a sliced or things that are sliced need to have some space in between them so that they dry individually, not as a clump. Drying times. So on average, and these are on average because how you slice things, how well you cooked it before, or if you blanched it before, or whatever, however you treated it before, are going to affect your drying times. So these are averages. On average, you are going to need 8 to 10 hours to dehydrate a bag of frozen vegetables. And yes, you can dehydrate straight from a bag of frozen into a dehydrator. It's actually one of the easiest and quickest ways to do it because really they've already been commercially prepared for you. So all the prep's done for you. If you're going to start dehydrating, just for the heck of it, now people will say, well, why would you dehydrate frozen things? Well, because your electricity goes out, or you don't have space in your freezer anymore. It's a really good opportunity. And so if you're going to start dehydrating from scratch and are kind of nervous about it, go buy a bag of frozen mixed vegetables. Go buy a bag of frozen corn. Go buy a bag of frozen whatever, and put it in your dehydrator. It'll come out perfect. It'll come out the right size. you'll be really happy and you will have accomplished something. Um, 8 to 10 hours for sliced or chopped mushrooms and onions. I'm going to tell you right now, if I have dehydrated onions, before I got a great deal on 100 pounds of commercially dehydrated onions, they will stink up your house. Some of those smells you don't care about when you're dehydrating, like citrus is a wonderful smell to have in your house. Onions, not so much. So that is one of those things that I put out on my round dehydrator. I think I used my square one too, but I dehydrated it outside because I did not want the smell of onions for 10 hours, in my house, because you never get rid of that smell. So just a little tip there, if you dehydrate onions, do it outside. 8 to 15 hours for all fresh vegetables and beans except for potatoes. Depending on how many beans you put in there or how well you pressure cook them, I usually do it overnight. You can't dehydrate something too much. You can never dehydrate anything too much. 12 to 15 hours for sweet and white potatoes. If they've been thinly sliced or chopped, I've actually found that takes closer to 24. If I remember, if you saw the longer sweet potatoes, those were done in about 12 hours, the long strips of sweet potatoes, but the ones that I sliced that were the round medallions, those took about 24 hours to dehydrate, and they were about probably a little bit over a quarter of an inch. I tried really hard to keep them uniform. That's the other thing you're going to want to make sure that you do, if you're not buying frozen to dehydrate, is that you want to have uniform pieces so that the dehydration kind of works the same all the way across. You're going to want 12 to 15 hours for fruits cut into quarter-inch slices or half-inch cubes. Not a real fan of cubes, but people do. 15 or at least 15 hours for fruit leather. That's a whole nother episode. 15 to 24 hours for grapes. That's how we get raisins. They are dehydrated grapes. I'm going to tell you right now, you're probably not going to want to do that. You're probably going to want to buy freeze-dried, because grapes and some small fruits, which we'll get into in just a second, you have to poke a hole into every single grape. Well, that's not too bad when you're talking grapes, but when you talk blueberries, that kind of sucks. So you have to poke a hole in it because it has to pierce the skin so that the water can evaporate out of the skin. And if you just leave it the way it is, you will dehydrate forever and a day. Like, it'll take you weeks. So make sure you poke a hole in it, just with a pin or something like that, just something to break the tension on the skin. 18 to 20 hours if you're going to dehydrate blueberries, raspberries, or whole cranberries. You have to poke a hole in every single one to break the surface tension on the skin. This is why, if you're going to dehydrate those three types of foods, I buy frozen. I will just buy a bag of frozen blueberries. I will buy a bag of frozen raspberries. I will buy a bag of frozen cranberries. I'll dump them on here and dehydrate them straight from frozen, because freezing breaks down the cell wall, so you don't have to worry about poking each individual one. Or you can save yourself time and trouble and buy freeze-dried food for those three things. That's actually what I do, because it's just not, in my opinion, worth the time or effort. Unless I was growing raspberries and got them for free, unless I was growing blueberries, got them for free, unless I was growing cranberries in a bog somewhere and got them for free, I would not bother dehydrating those fruits. I would buy them freeze-dried. Or I would buy frozen and dehydrate those if you really feel like you need to have some of those fruits on hand in a dehydrated state. You can dehydrate for 24 to 36 hours. Dates, chop them up, put them in a dehydrator, and you will have date sugar, which is just awesome if you're following a whole food plant-based diet that doesn't use, that encourages minimal use of sugars and uses dates as their sugar substitute. So that's something really cool to know. So what can you dehydrate? Basically, you can dehydrate almost anything. Fruits and vegetables, obviously, we've talked about. You can also dehydrate and create powders, which is really cool for things, especially like smoothies. You can create leathers, dehydrate and create leathers. You can dehydrate and create your own herbs. If you grow your own herbs, you can dehydrate them in a dehydrator. That's really fun to do. You can dehydrate flowers, like edible flowers or just flowers to be pretty. You can dehydrate tea blends. You can dehydrate tofu, which we will do a video on. You can dehydrate dairy. That's going to be our next video. First dehydrating video is how to dehydrate nut milk. We can dehydrate bread. You can dehydrate and make crackers. We'll probably do a video on that. You can dehydrate flavor boosters, and you can dehydrate instant soup mixes. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to dehydrate whole meals. I really love red beans and rice. I really, really love it. But I cannot get the spices and seasonings in Louisiana red beans to save my soul. So I literally have like made this meal and dehydrated it up so that I have a meal ready to go in a thermos. So you can think about things like that you can dehydrate whole meals, and we'll do some dehydrating on that so that you don't have to. Now, again, why would you do that? Well, when we get to our series on thermos cooking, you'll see why you would want to dehydrate a whole meal or meal stuff, so that you can just add hot water to it and the meal will be ready to go. We're about done right now, but I will put the link again down at the bottom for where you can buy an Excalibur tray and where you can buy this book. I'm really going to encourage you, if you're going to get into dehydrating, to buy this book, The Ultimate Dehydrator Cookbook by Tammy Gangloff. Her website is Dehydrate to Store. Really chock full of information. Really great book. Really great person. And dehydrating is a lot of fun. We will see you next week when we start the dehydrating series for vegan food storage. Have a good day, and again, just simply start putting food by.